In the studio, we've got three very senior people of politics from different parties. We're going to have a debate. We will take some calls. We'll try and sort out the major issues. First, Leader of the Greens, Senator Richard Di Natale. Richard, good afternoon.
G'day, Tom.
From the Labor Party, the Shadow Minister for Immigration, Richard Marles. Hello, Richard.
Tom, how are you?
And the Federal Environment Minister from the Liberal Party, Greg Hunt. Greg, good afternoon.
And good afternoon, Tom and Richard and Richard.
Okay, now, firstly, housing affordability. Some people think this is the major issue of the election, and yet I would say thus far it has gone largely unreported. To you first, Richard Marles, housing affordability, what will you do?
Well, obviously, the policy that we have in place around negative gearing, which I should say first and foremost is about a budget saving $32 billion over a 10-year period, which is fair budget repair, also is going to have a positive impact in terms of housing affordability. And what this will do is not get rid of negative gearing in its entirety. It will focus negative gearing on new properties so that we have greater housing stock, and obviously it won't affect any existingly negatively geared house.
Okay, but you said it's only a budget save, but I mean, to help first home buyers, you've actually got to push the price of housing down, or at least stop it rising so fast. Do you think that will be achieved?
Well, I think it takes heat out of the property market. I think it removes one of the upward factors in terms of pushing housing prices up, and that's a big issue out there. But we still haven't heard a policy from the government when it comes to housing affordability.
Well, as luck would have it, a representative of the government is sitting right next to you. Greg Hunt, housing affordability, how speak you?
Sure, there's a right way and a wrong way to deal with it. The right way is about land release and making sure that you have two things. Land which is available, and we want to work with the states on that, and where there is Commonwealth land available that should be released, then that's something that we have already talked about. I think that's extremely important, as well as construction costs.
Commonwealth-owned land, you'll release it for the building of new housing?
One example that we've already talked about is the Maribyrnong defence land, which we would like to strike an agreement on with the state. There is some movement, but I think it can be advanced significantly. That's not news. That's something that we have been working on. But secondly, not just land release, also the fact that construction costs are way too high, and that's the whole reason behind the election, the Australian Building and Construction Commission, to get the CFMEU...
Is that the reason behind the election? Because I've not heard very much about that.
It was the central reason for a double dissolution election.
I realise that, but I haven't heard it talked about much.
I am raising it. And then beyond that, the idea of Labor's negative gearing proposal, which is about hurting housing values for existing homeowners and driving up the cost of rents for those that don't have a home, is precisely the wrong way to do it and would be dramatically destructive.
Senator Di Natale, housing affordability?
Well, I don't know that I just heard a plan there from Greg. I've heard a lot of criticism, but no plan. Look, we came out some years ago talking about the abolition of negative gearing for new purchases. We think that's important, and good on the Labor Party for at least adopting that in part.
That's of existing properties.
That's of all future purchases.
Future purchases.
So we would, and that's new or old. That's where our party differs from the Labor Party.
So you would
grandfather existing people who are negatively geared at the moment. They wouldn't be affected, but for any future purchase of a existing property, a new property, we would abolish negative gearing.
So basically residential property, be it new or existing, that could no longer be negatively geared.
Correct, for anyone who chose to make a future purchase. Right. And there's no question, and reform of capital gains tax also goes along with that, and that is part of the Labor Party's proposal as well. And you
agree with that proposal?
Well, we'd like to see the capital gains tax discount abolished altogether. I think the Labor Party talking about reducing it, but we would like to see it abolished altogether. Bottom line is, we have got a massive problem with housing affordability and intergenerational inequity. You've got young people who are being locked out of the housing market indefinitely, and the idea of releasing, a block of land in Maribyrnong that's somehow going to fix the problem, that's nonsense. You do need to tackle this as a structural problem where we are the only country where we make it easier to buy your third, fourth, fifth, sixth house than to buy your first house. That's wrong. And for those young kids who are locked out of the property market, this will take some of the heat out of it and make housing more affordable, along with bringing in a saving so we can invest in community housing, public housing, in crisis accommodation and those sorts of important services.
Can I ask Richard Di Natale, if you are in coalition or alliance or in partnership with the ALP, does that mean that you would seek to extend their negative gearing proposal, which would take negative gearing off all existing asset classes other than new houses to even apply to
The
new
premise
houses.
of your question is wrong for starters.
So it's our policy, and our policy is our policy. Can I just say the only reason the Liberal Party have decided not to go down this road is because the Greens and Labor decided that it was, with the advice of very eminent economists, that this was an important step. And instead of showing a bit of leadership, Malcolm Turnbull and the coalition smelt political opportunity, thought they'd run a big scare campaign, which they've tried, and it's been a spectacular failure.
Well, there's also 1.3 million Australians who see negatively. And by the way, hands up, I do not have a negatively geared property,
but
a
they won't
lot
be
of people
affected.
do.
They won't be affected
But
under
existing
either
people won't
policy.
be affected.
I know.
And that's an important point
Richard
to make.
Marles, we just heard the possibility of a Labor-Greens coalition again.
You heard it from the Liberals.
Right.
There is no possibility of a Labor-Green deal.
I've also heard it from Richard Natale.
Every day,
and
Richard-
he can
Richard
wish it
Natale talks
all
about
he likes. There will be no deal between Labor and the Greens.
Can I just say to you, let's just say Saturday night, I mean, everybody's saying this is going to be a very close election, and I believe that to be true. I'll be watching Carlton playing Collingwood on Saturday night, but let's just say you get to the point where neither of the major parties has a majority of seats. And Bill Shorten's faced with this, I can be Prime Minister, but I have to ring up this gentleman over here, Richard Natale. But, if we do a deal, and the Senator has said to me a number of times in the past he's willing to do one, are you telling me that Bill Shorten will not grasp that opportunity to be Prime Minister?
I'm absolutely telling you that there will be no deal between Labor and the Greens in any scenario, including the one you've just described. But the real point here, Tom, is we are in this to win it, and we're in it to win it in our own right. And what we're seeking to do is to win the 21 seats required for us to govern. And that's where our focus is at.
Senator Natale, I mean, you've said a couple of times to me that you think a deal could be done.
At the moment, the only deal that's going around is the deal between the Liberal Party and the National Party to swap preferences and try and keep the Greens and Independents out. And, the Coles and Woolworths of politics, they'll always join together to try and keep out some competition. And it's why people are turning to the Greens and Independents in bigger numbers, because they're sick of it. They're sick of the duopoly.
You were desperately trying to do a deal with the Libs.
So what we've got is we've got the Liberal Party and the Labor Party who are doing a deal to swap preferences. If it's a close election, we've got a couple of alternatives, Tom. We go back to the polls. We don't want that. And for Malcolm Turnbull or Bill Shorten...
I can tell you, after a 9-week election campaign, I don't think anybody wants that.
Well, we're with them. But it appears that both the Prime Minister and the Opposition Leader are saying we're not going to be responsible if the people of Australia vote for more independent voices for Greens and other representatives. We're going to ignore the decision of the people of Australia and we're going to go to another election. Well, I just think that's irresponsible. And what I think will happen is that there will be a constructive discussion, that wiser heads will prevail, and hopefully what we do is end up with a good outcome for the nation.
But can I just say, that's not it at all, Richard. We just, Labor and the Greens believe in different things. If people want to vote for the Greens, that's fine. The only point we're making, which we're completely entitled to make, is that whatever the result on Saturday, we won't be doing a deal with the Greens to form government.
So, Tom, I feel as if I'm in a family fight here. I'm sitting between the two kids squabbling. The truth is, I can see I can just about see a large pink farm animal with wings flying past the window here. Of course, Labor will do a deal with the Greens if there is a hung parliament. And what does that mean for the public? Richard D. Natale has been very upfront. He wants to end the current border protection policies. He wants cuts to defence spending. He wants to make sure there's a higher electricity tax, and he wants the private health rebate to be phased out. They're the very things that the Greens want, and that's what they'll get from Labor.
Well, luckily we have the leader of the Greens in here, and we will explore more of what the Greens and Labor and the Liberals think in a moment. 96900 693. It's 4:18.